Welcome to our library studio. This is another edition of the Yahweh blog. We are continuing our series on the Antichrist, who should be quite obvious to everyone, even if you didn't know what the prophets have said, and they were explicit. They described a man who could be none other than Donald Trump, and they did so between, 2,700 and 3,400 years ago. So it's pretty tough for us to pretend that we don't know. And yet, look at Israel, the land of the prophets. And yet they're celebrating Donald Trump as if he is the second coming of King Cyrus, when he is the great betrayer. He is the one that the prophets spoke of that would destroy Israel, that was the corporeal manifestation of Hasatan. And when you look at his antics, when you listen to what he has to say, when you consider his perversion and his deception, it's quite obvious that he's not only Satan in the flesh, but that Satan, to a large extent, has lost control of him. It reminds me of what happened with Paul when Paul had to whine in the second letter he wrote to the Corinthians in the last chapter. He said, okay, I had a really big ego. My ego got out of hand. So Satan had to assign, a special demon to me to keep me under control. And so I wouldn't confabulate quite as much as I would otherwise. And you look at Muhammad, where he admitted twice that he was demon possessed and actually dedicated entire surahs to demons. And at one point said that all of Allah's messengers speak on behalf of Satan. He just got worse and worse. And, after a while, Satan has indulged, Allah has indulged in every one of his corruptions, from incest to pedophilia to rape to terror to mass murder to thievery, you name it. But he just became a madman, so out of control that, it's really astonishing that there's a single Muslim, much less billions of them, as reprehensible as Muhammad was and as disgusting as Allah is throughout the Quran. And the same thing is true with Christianity, as reprehensible as Paul was. He could never quote God accurate and never once quote God accurate. Matter of fact, Satan was more accurate in his quotation of God in the garden when trying to fool Chawa than Paul was throughout his letters. He never once quoted Gospel Jesus, because Gospel Jesus didn't even exist at the time he was writing his letters, and wouldn't come to exist for 10 years after his death. So it is really with a heavy heart that I tell you that America has actually elected the Antichrist. Trump became demon possessed. He certainly was Satan's type long before he became demon possessed. He's always been a pedophile and a rapist and an overt liar, deceiver, con artist his whole life. But during the time that he lost the prior election and he was losing one criminal case after another, he was very quickly going bankrupt, and he would have been in jail. He made a deal with the devil. It's kind of like the negotiation he just had with Hamas, where he negotiated for 20 Israeli captives, hostages, for 2,000 jihadi thugs, and praised himself for having done the deal of the century, when he accomplished absolutely nothing else but having negotiated on behalf of the devil with the devil. And this guy here, well, you don't want that. That's coffee. It's hot. Sorry. Can't have that. Wookie is a tea fanatic. Must have thought that I had iced tea here, but hot coffee is probably not the best thing for Wookiees. It would stunt their growth, and that's important when you're the capacity of a Wookiee. Where we were in our last program is we were reading through the 9th chapter of Daniel. It begins with quite a thud, and that Daniel gets everything wrong. So if you want to call him as a prophet, good luck with that, because he couldn't even get current events right, and he wasn't even close. He got every statement wrong. Then he makes a number of statements which are reasonably true, but they're sad assessments of Israel. They're not prophetic statements. He says, for example, we have missed the way. and he includes himself in it because he was included in it. We have missed the way, and we are guilty of perverse corruptions and distortions. We have violated the standard because we have rebelled. We have turned away from the terms and conditions of your, speaking of God's, relationship agreement, and also from your means to make informed and rational decisions regarding the way to justly resolve disputes. Daniel, my God is judgmental, 9:5. And that's where we concluded our last program. So we're moving on now to the next statement, which is Daniel 9:6. We have not listened to your co-workers, the prophets, who, to show the way to receive the benefits of the relationship, communicated the word in your name. To our leaders, to our elite, to our forefathers, and also to all of the people of the land. You'll notice that Daniel did not include himself in like prophets like myself, because he wasn't one. But there were 3 prophets who did visit him. They were Gabriel, who was Dode, Mikael, who was Yada, and Elia, who was not named, but obviously he is the third character in the conclusion of God's story, which is what the prophecies pertain to. The fact of the matter is that Jews have been bad for a very long time. They were in Babylon as a timeout for bad behavior. So we do our fellow man a great service when we accurately convey what Yahweh has revealed through his prophets. And that was what Daniel was trying to do when he cited Yirmiah and then drew conclusions based upon what Yirmiah, who was a prophet, revealed. And in this regard, it's important to note that Daniel was reporting what Hanabi, the prophets, like Moshe, Dode, Yashaya, and in particular, in this case, Yashaya, had been inspired to convey to us. He was not claiming to one of them. He was reporting based upon them, which is really all I have done all of this time. I've tried to take that one step further, so I'm not only providing a more complete and accurate translation of the Torah and prophets than anyone heretofore, and one that's more easily verified than anyone has ever attempted previously, more complete, more accurate, and more easily verified with that very unique amplified format. But I also do a running commentary, so I help you understand what the text is saying. But in addition to that, I derive by making connections between what God says in various places, understanding that leads to inspired insights. And that is my primary purpose in all of this, and to make conclusions, deductions, and reveal insights that help those who are interested in knowing God become part of his covenant and approach him as is consistent with God's testimony. Occasionally I will make forecasts of what is going to happen in the future. I do not make them as a prophet would, where I said, thus says Yahweh, on such and such a date, such and such is going to happen. I actually say them based upon an analysis of what the prophets have revealed. That's how I've come to know what day that Shabuah will be fulfilled, when Teruah, Kippurim, and Sukkah will be fulfilled, when Chag Matzah in 4,000 Yah was fulfilled. So I know these dates because I have a better understanding of the prophets than anyone previously. According to Yahweh, there's several places where there appears to be a rather overt connection between the role I'm playing and the term prophet. But while that is what God has revealed, I've never claimed it for myself, nor have I ever issued a prophecy of that sort. Although it's interesting that in my predictions of what is going to happen, based upon what I have read through the prophets and come to understand through them, have been 100% accurate in what I have forecast. So moments ago, we talked, that was actually in our last program here from the library studio, that Daniel was used by Yahweh to just be a scribe. And what was interesting is prior to his citation from Yirmiyah on the length of time that they would be incarcerated in Babel, Yahweh's name had not been used by Daniel, and it's used more sparingly in the book of Daniel than anywhere else. And yet here he acknowledges something which, had they been listening, would have been devastating for Judaism. Since their exile in Babylon and continuing through the composition of the Babylonian Talmud and well beyond, religious Jews have never spoken Yahweh's name. It is not included anywhere in their writings. Therefore, no one should be listening to them. Now, I realize that Christians, Muslims, and progressives are similarly misled, but it's not the same. God did not cut his covenant with them, liberate them, or address them through the prophets of similar ethnicity and their language, or for 1,000 years. That's a long time to be communicating to the same group of people in their language. But they just chose not to listen. The path to God is correctly deduced in the manner Daniel finally came to understand by reading what Yahweh's prophets had written for their behalf. And I just want to share something with you before we return to the next statement in Daniel. And that is that Jews will claim to be Torah observant, but they're actually Talmud observant, which is their rabbinical arguments. And the Talmud has nothing to do with the Torah, other than the rabbis try to justify their religion by taking snippets out of context and misappropriating what God actually said. When they rally around the Torah is put in a blanket, and then it's put inside of this whorish, garish container. God, it looks like the Oval Office now in the White House. It's just hideously over the top. And they kiss it and fondle it and dance all around the room with it. But if they actually observe the Torah, the first thing they would come to is, woe is us, because God is overtly opposed to religion. And the entire process of the Exodus, which dominates the Torah, of course, it's abysmal. Jews are constantly irascible. They're constantly religious. They're constantly rebellious. The presentation of Jews in the Torah is abysmal. They wouldn't be fondling it and kissing it while being religious if they actually read it and thought about it. So this next statement reads, approaching you are those who are right, but for us is the presence of confusion and shame. Daniel again put himself as us in the presence of confusion and shame, personal humiliation here. That's one of the things that we talked about in the earlier show, is that there is no word that can be translated humble in conjunction with a relationship with Yahweh in the Hebrew language. The two words that are, when you go to the verbal root, one means wrap tightly with God, and the other one means to be responsive to God. And that all of the words that have a humble or humiliation connotation in the word, like bosheth here, it speaks of confusion, shame, humiliation. This is the stuff of those who are disassociated from God, not those who are in his presence. Those that are in his presence are right about him, and they are never humble in his presence. They are always strong, firm, upright, bold. So here's another example of that, where you have bosheth, and it speaks of humiliation because of confusion. It is the same to this day for the people of Yehudah and for the inhabitants of Jerusalem, even for Israel, those who are nearby and those who are far away, in all of the places which you have scattered them due to their disloyalty and their fraudulent claims. This is speaking of religious treachery, their propensity to lie, overstepping their bounds while acting as if they were above it all, Rabbi, by the way, means exalted. So they are pretending to be worthy when all they're doing is leading Jews away from God and enriching and empowering themselves in the process. And it is true that not only to that day, but to this day, the people of Yehuda and the inhabitants of Jerusalem and all of those Jews who are around the world, there are very, very few of them who know Yahweh, who are loved by Yahweh in return. And most of them are disloyal because of their fraudulent political and religious claims. And then Daniel was right. He said this makes them untrustworthy and unreliable, as well as in violation of the agreement with you. God chose Israel. Israel has never chosen God in return. Yahweh on us, again, he is including himself, is the presence of confusion, humiliation, and shame as a result of our improper attitude. Bosheth. Bosheth is a humiliated, humble attitude. And God associates that with shame. And it's an improper attitude from our political and religious authorities. That is where you get this idea of humiliation and meekness and wussiness, if you will, in God's presence. It is reprehensible. And here, Daniel, even Daniel, who doesn't know very much, knows that Bosheth is improper. You ought not be humble in God's presence because it's shameful. You know, if God wanted people to bow down to him, to worship him, to be fearful in his presence, to be meek and really humble, then he would have been a Lord so that they could obey him, so that he could lord over them. But he is not. He's a father. And that requires the opposite kind of response. It's just abysmal that there are so many people who continue to advance this nonsense and then act as they're holier than thou, and that they have this special understanding because they have an appreciation for being humble. You're not speaking for God if you are. And this problem, he said, is permanent. It permeates our leaders, our representatives, and our forefathers because we have erred, missing the way to approach you. The way of shame, of being humble, is not the way to approach God. We don't crawl to him. We walk to him. There are those who were right, but you'll notice that Daniel did not consider himself among them. Rather than being correct about Yahweh, he explicitly listed himself among those who were confused. And with the natural tendency to be right, we read right past this admission when he scolded his people for being wrong. And that really is the dominant theme throughout the Torah and prophets. Israel was wrong. Israel is wrong. Israel has always been wrong. Israel is still wrong. And until you return and become right with God, God's not returning to you. Now, having studied the prophets, beginning with Moshe, we know that this had been the case, and it was prolific during the Yatsa Exodus and has remained so, no matter of the place and time. Israel has been ma'al, disloyal. God's people have developed a propensity for ma'al, fraudulent claims, which metastasized in Babylon and remained malignant for another 2,000 years, continuing to do so throughout their Babylonian Talmud. In times past, most societies were corrupted from the top down. The masses were typically illiterate and thus easy to influence and manipulate. It is how Christianity spread. That is what was occurring, of course, here, and it was exacerbated in ancient times because of the prevalence of caste systems. It was the arrogant leaders who imposed religion on their fellows because it was the easiest way to control them. They could claim God said this, that, and the other thing, and the subjects had no say in the matter. They couldn't refute it with another text because most were illiterate, and they couldn't stand up against the kings because, well, they would kill them. But it is shameful that governmental, religious, military, and economic leaders deliberately confuse the people so that they can take advantage of them. This approach began in Babel with Babylon. The king owned everything. He was both general and God. Religion and politics, the military, and the economic schemes were all integrated and institutionalized under one man's dominion. It's what's happening, by the way, to America as we are witnessing with the Donald dumpster. The same level of confusion is inherent among Jews on the cusp of Yahweh's return. In Israeli politics, there is no separation between synagogue and state. Rabbis are overwhelmingly political, and the political are often overtly religious. Of the many things which have been done and have made in this particular case, if I want to give one example, Benjamin Netanyahu, bad for Israel, is his willingness to bribe the Haredim for their political support. It's become devastating because they're parasites. Now, that said, the progressives under Yair Lapid may be worse for having endorsed the two-state solution and then divided Israel over necessary judicial reform. Also, that collectively they could reclaim power in a nation controlled by the parliamentary system, which is a system of bribes. And in this battle between religious and political narcissists, the people are played for fools. In fact, all of Israel was played for fools by Muslims because the entire intent of Al-Aqsa flood was to bludgeon Israel sufficiently that they could be assured that Israel would enter and destroy Gaza. And with the destruction of Gaza, the world would turn against Israel, and Israel would be isolated and vulnerable, and thus more readily destroyed. Now, speaking of them, by including those dwelling in Jerusalem and in Israel in this condemnation, this statement is intended to address today's inhabitants. This is evident because Jerusalem had been depopulated by Babylon, and Israel was by that time in Assyria. Having suffered so many centuries of rampant disloyalty and fraudulent claims, Yahweh naturally sees his people as untrustworthy and wholly unreliable, even as disappointing and often disgusting. This problem runs from the top down and includes the secular and the religious. While it is unfortunate that Belshazzar, may the Lord Bel protect the king, as Daniel preferred to be called, referenced God as my Lord, the rest of what follows is readily discerned by reading the Nabi of Yahweh, particularly Moshe, Dod, Yeshaya, and Yirmiah. Therefore, after proving that he wasn't one, Daniel demonstrated the value of reading what the actual prophets had written. He said, according to my Lord and my upright one, Adonai / Edon, Ane, my master and or my base, my foundation and pillar, our God, the exceedingly merciful, compassionate, and forgiving. Indeed, we have rebelled against him. Okay. He's painting Yahweh quite differently than God would paint himself in this point of view. First of all, God's not a Lord and not going to present himself as one. And second of all, while God is merciful and compassionate, and he is he is one who is willing to pardon under the right circumstances, it is for a very, very, very small percentage of the people. In fact, the second statement, Yahweh etched in stone, specifically said that his mercy, his compassion His pardons, if you will, his favoritism will be afforded to thousands. Thousands amongst billions is 1 in a million. That's the second statement he etched in stone. This was Daniel 9:9. So God has a plan to pardon those who have done what was required to earn that pardon. And he wants to wipe the slate clean so that his family appears perfect in his eyes. And that is what Dode, who is presented here as Gabriel, did by fulfilling Pesach and Matzah, leading to Bikurim. Unfortunately, the likes of those Daniel represents have chosen to ignore, even to reject, what father and son have done. They have vehemently attacked the Passover lamb, nullifying the benefit of Dode's sacrifice. They do not even acknowledge what his nephesh soul accomplished during Matzah by depositing our guilt in Sheol. It's the greatest gift ever given. And therein is the reason Yahweh went outside of the tribe of Yisrael in the end to redirect his people's attention back to he and his son before it was too late. Now, Judaism has incorporated matzah into Passover, just as if it were an ingredient. They are clueless regarding Bikurim and Shabuah, and they have replaced Teruah with a Babylonian holiday, Rosh Hashanah. Especially frustrating for father and son, they have inverted the purpose of Kippurim, turning the day of reconciliations into a time of affliction. It is as if they never want to see or hear Yahweh again. Making matters worse, they have ignored the role their shepherd, Messiah, and king played in their redemption, irritating father and son and traumatizing themselves to no end, along with a whole host of chickens. Knowing that there will be some who return, it dawned upon me one day while I was celebrating Yom Kippurim, this would have been a few years ago, that it is Yahweh and Dode's gift to their people. Having watched them reject and then deny what they accomplished together by fulfilling Chag Matzah on their behalf in year 4000 Yah, providing the benefits of the covenant through Pesach, Matzah, and Bikurim. Father and son are offering their people another opportunity to reconcile their relationship during Teruah, prior to Kippurim. Teruah, the day of the herald, therefore, is a time that Yahweh and Dodes are providing the final opportunity to apply the benefits, if you will, of Chag Matzah to those who have failed to capitalize. Teruah is even similar to Pesach and Matzah, because it is a sacrifice and thus an enormously painful experience that leads to Kippurim, a celebration, a time to enjoy the return of wayward sons and daughters. Foremost among those not listening was the one speaking, sadly. He was representing the nature of Israelites then and now. In addition, we have not listened to Yahweh's, our God's voice, by having our steps guided by his Torah teaching and instructions, his guidance and directions, which to reveal the benefits of the relationship he provided in our presence through the hand of his servants, the prophets. Daniel 9:10. You know, it's interesting here, of course, that there was no oral law. There was no Talmud at this point. The Jerusalem Talmud, which is very short and inadequate, wouldn't be written until the 2nd century CE, and the Babylonian Talmud was, for the most part, amalgamated by rabbis in the 4th and 5th, mostly 6th century BC or CE. So this is right around 555 BCE. So we're dealing 700 years before there was a competitive religious document. And even at this point, Daniel is admitting the Jews were not Torah observant. In fact, it got so bad that when Hezekiah was king, uh, they actually found a copy of the Torah in a corner of the temple, all covered in dust. And it's something they hadn't seen in so long, they didn't even know it existed. Didn't even know it existed. They had turned the temple into a religious shrine. And it was after it appeared and Hezekiah and those around him read it, they said, "Oh boy, are we in the S house? We're in real trouble here." And they recognized how important it was for them to get rid of all religious traces and artifacts, and to get the Lowy trained so that they could present the Moed Mikre, beginning with Pesach, Matzah, and Bakodim, and that they needed to get the people's attention and to get their act together with regarding, particularly Pesach, Matzah, and Bakodim, the first three, and spring Mikre. And the motivation for them was the same motivation that Israel's going to have here over the next 8 years. It was do or die. Unfortunately, they didn't make this decision because, well, we read the Torah, we compared it to our religious sages, and we decided that Yahweh was smarter than our religious sages. That isn't what happened. What happened is there were 185,000 Assyrians armed to the teeth outside of Jerusalem, and it was either return to Yahweh or die. And in the next 8 years, during the time of Israel's troubles, the reason that there is a goodly number of Israelites who return to Yahweh and leave religion and politics is it will be do or die. So this says, in addition, we have not listened to Yahweh, our God's voice, by having our steps guided by his Torah teaching, instructions, his guidance and directions, which reveal the benefits of the relationship he provided in our presence through the hand of his servants, the prophets. Now, what's interesting here is that he is claiming that the Torah was delivered by the prophets, plural. Now, I don't have a problem with that, because even though Moshe was the one who Yahweh provided the dictation of Bereshith, Genesis, all of that transpired before, long before Moshe's time, and Moshe was then a participant in Shemoth and Kara and Bamidbar and Dabarim, and was the voice of Dabarim. There isn't anybody else as a prophet that is speaking during that time. You have a brief moment where Miriam is a prophetess for having to help the women sing the Song of the Sea, although she goes off the rails and is divorced by God. And you have two fellows that are mentioned as prophets, Eldod and Midod. During Moshe's breakdown where he asked God to kill him, with God saying, I've got a couple of guys, you get them to the promised land, I'll take it from there. But, and we're told that there was a moment where there was some attempt at prophecy from the 70 elders, but there isn't a single word from them that has any merit. So that wasn't much helpful. So the only way that you can claim, there's two ways you can claim that the Torah was brought to us by prophets, plural, and that Yosha ben Nun was also a prophet. And you can include, which I think is reasonable, the book of Yosha into the 5 books of the Torah, making it 6 books of the Torah. I think that is a reasonable conclusion. The other reasonable conclusion is my favorite, which is Yahweh's Torah, which means teaching and guidance, permeates throughout the prophets. So there is no prophet of Yahweh who doesn't include Yahweh's Torah teaching and guidance. So, and also the Torah itself is prophetic. So Torah and prophets is a bit verbose, because the Torah permeates all the prophets, and all of the prophets not only conveyed Yahweh's guidance, but the Torah itself is a prophetic book. So he held the answer in his hands, of course, and had read it, but he was unable to apply its lessons. And in this way, Daniel continues to represent the Haredim, the masters of duplicitous delusion. Very little has changed since these words were written nearly 2,600 years ago. The source of man's problems remains singular: ignorance of Yahweh's Torah teachings and instructions, his guidance and directions. Although we have a lot of people now that are snippet folks that will plant their sword and die on a hill with a singular theme. And it may be kosher food laws that we've seen somebody die on the hill of I will be humble. We have others that are dying on the hill of Mother God. There are lots of little slices that people can pull out of context and misrepresent. But the fact is, they don't know the Torah. If they knew the whole of the Torah, they would never have made any of those claims. So rather than listen to God, believers prefer to place their faith in the likes of Akiba and Maimonides, Peter and Paul, Allah and Muhammad, and even some false prophets today. And they have searched, and well, in my case, I have searched Chabad and the Christian websites for their explanations and narratives throughout the first chapters of Daniel, because I was trying to make sense of them. It's a religious and political mess. And throughout, there's a complete inversion of reality, even here found in the opening statement of the 9th chapter. And all they do is they venerate Daniel's religiosity as opposed to hold him accountable to truth or God's standard. Now, that's inexcusable, since the religious founders previously mentioned all failed to present their own history accurately. None could foretell the future, universally failing the test of a prophet. By contrast, every word in the prophetic portions of this book spoken by the actual prophets came true as predicted, proving that the visions of the future were orchestrated by God. For that reason, an individual has to be either ignorant or irrational to value such men over the God they sought to replace. Lots of people who are willing to lie to you for all manner of selfish reasons. It is relevant to know that Yahweh's Torah teaching isn't limited to the first 5 or now possibly 6 books which comprise his witness. His Torah guidance permeates everything he has revealed, including throughout the books called prophets, and throughout the writings and the Mizmor and the Mashal. Everything Yahweh revealed from Bereshith to Malachi is both prophetic and contains Torah guidance. It all exists so that we might avail ourselves of his mercy and enjoy his love, so that we know how to earn the benefits of being adopted into his family and then engage with him. Now, driving this point home, this remains true for Jews who overwhelmingly prefer their Babylonian Talmud. Their problem with their affinity for it runs so deep, they not only lie by claiming it was first given by G-D with the written Torah, they actually call this book of rabbinical drool a Torah. Here, these jerks, these religious malcreants, the rabbis, on one hand, they erase Yahweh's name. On the other, they called their Talmud Torah, stealing Yahweh's title. Reprehensible. All of Israel has passed over your Torah teaching and your directions, and have turned away, refusing to listen to the sound of your voice. I don't care where you turn. You can read any book that belongs in the classic group that are attributed to Yahweh. And what you read is that God is disgusted by his people's propensity to be religious, to listen to religious sages and rabbis and pastors and priests rather than to him. It really just all gets down to that. Goyim and Yehudim prefer to listen to the religious, to conspirators, to the political, instead of God. I mean, there is nobody who has ever written more comprehensive books on the testimony of Yahweh than I have with these 35 books behind me. No one's come close. 25,000 pages of translations and explanations. And yet, those who lie about God, about our relationship, our fate, who deceive in the name of religion or politics, are essentially infinitely more popular. So all of Israel has passed over your Torah, teaching and directions. And we have turned away, refusing to listen to the sound of your voice. As a result, the curse of Allah, an incompetent and dishonest oath by which the people are harmed when swearing to Allah, or hearing those swearing to Allah, will be poured out upon us, in addition to the sworn promise which was written in the Torah of Moshe, the one working with the Almighty, because we have been wrong and we have missed the way, according to him. I've always thought it unusual that most everyone is comfortable with the idea of Yahweh choosing to work through a 80-year-old shepherd in Moshe to deliver the Torah, to work through a nearly 100-year-old Abraham to convey the narrative of the covenant. Noah was several hundred years old, I think close to 600 years old, when Yahweh began discussing the need to build a ship to protect himself and his family. The hands that built it were Noah. The instructions were from Yahweh. Why are people so uncomfortable with the idea that Yahweh communicates through men? And we have very, very few incidences where God is shown speaking independently of men, and even then it is written down by the men who were at the event. Every place else, God is either speaking through someone he has chosen or he is working with them. And since God says he doesn't change, why wouldn't he continue the same way? Something for you to think about. And since those that he worked through and those that participated in what he wanted accomplished, particularly Dode, spoke in a manner that was consistent with Yahweh's teachings. They didn't try to contradict God, tried to understand what he was saying, and they spoke in his name. And so if God is consistent, he would do the same. And with all of these people, God was very clear that he had chosen to speak through them and that he had chosen to work with them. And so if you are one who is being distinguished by God in that way, he's made it clear through his Torah and prophets that that is the case. So throughout the Torah and the prophets, the message is the same. The Israelites and Yehudim are told that they have brought a curse on themselves because they are estranged from God, and that remains true to this moment. And this is because they prefer their jaundiced rhetoric to Yahweh's teaching and guidance. With this assessment indisputable, why do so many Jews remain unaware that Yahweh hates their religion? Since Moshe, Yosha ben Nun, Shamuel, Dode, Yeshaya, Hosea, Yirmiah, Eliah, Zechariah, Malachi were all inspired by God. Yoel, to condemn the Jewish religion. We add Chabauk, and we also have the condemnation of the Christian religion. Here, a condemnation of the Islamic religion. We would obviously be wise to view Yahweh as decidedly anti-religious. It's the number one theme through the Torah and prophets is that God is anti-religious. And yet, numbskulls hold up their Bible as if it were a religious book. Well, with that title and those translations, it certainly approximates it. And with the inclusion of the New Testament and the false prophets, there's a lot of rubbish in there. But the Torah and the prophets that Yahweh inspired are anti-religious, overwhelmingly so. God has and he will continue to reject the religious for having rejected him. Now, I've made the distinction between the rabbinical Talmud and Yahweh's Torah, a point which is underscored in this statement. It is Yahweh's Torah which is being neglected, and there is only one of them, not two. And even then, the Torah is associated with Yahweh's co-worker, Moshe, and it remains singular as well as written, not oral. So this is the problem which, as much as any other, separates Yahweh and Yehudim. And it cannot be resolved by tossing one and clinging to the other. You know, God just said, well, God didn't say, but we have a man who was writing for him say that acknowledge what he was witnessing. They had rejected the Torah of Moshe. And there is no mention of an oral Torah, so it clearly didn't exist. He confirmed with the words he revealed and which he spoke against us in opposition to our judgment regarding our political and religious leaders who have ruled over us. Yes, Daniel knew these things for the very reason that I prescribed earlier. He read the Torah. He read Yosha. He read Zechariah. He read Yashaya. He read Dod's Mizmor. He knew exactly the point that he was making because he had read the prophets, and the prophet says that God is disgusted by his people's propensity to be religious. He is opposed to the judgment of their political and religious leaders who have ruled over us, as Daniel says. You can read any one of the prophets, pick up any book, and you're going to find this, to bring great misery and suffering upon us. It's the religious and political leaders who have brought great suffering and misery on God's people. I mean, the fact is, Islam that has bludgeoned Jews for worse than any other political or religious dogma in the last 1400 years was brought to bear because rabbis sold Muhammad Talmud stories. Had they not sold Muhammad the Talmud stories that he twisted and attributed to Allah, the Quran would have no religious credentials, and it would have been rejected outright, and no one would have ever heard of the thug that robbed people in and around Yathrib, today's Medina. No Islam. If rabbis hadn't taught Paul how to misrepresent the testimony of God, how to find statements that could be twisted to convey a religious intent, and had they stood up against him when he used that technique to rob them of their Messiah, there would be no Christianity. No Christianity, then there would have been no subjugation in Europe for that 18 centuries. There would have been no Holocaust. Rabbis have hurt Jews tremendously. Netanyahu's ongoing war in Gaza, where he claims that he's going to fight until there are no more Hamas, that Hamas cannot rule Gaza, and that they lay down their weapons and they surrender. That will never occur, and it cannot be achieved. And so he has a never-ending war in Gaza, and all he does is continue to destroy Gaza, turn the whole world against Israel, make Israel isolated, and it's now a vassal state of Donald J. Trump, who just happens to be the Antichrist. You can see what God is getting at when he says throughout his prophets that religious and political leaders who have ruled over Israel have brought great misery and suffering upon us, which has not occurred in any other place under the whole of heavens, similar to what has and will occur in Jerusalem. You have no one to blame but yourself, Israel. It's all written here for you to understand. Daniel was not a very bright boy. He read the prophets and he got it. I'm a damn goy. I read the prophets and I got it. Why can't you? And the only reason you don't is because you don't want to. You don't like Yahweh. You prefer your rabbis. You prefer your politicians. And that choice is going to cost you 10 million lives over the next 8 years. Now I'm driving this point home because it has been missed over the past 25 centuries. In quotes, he spoke against us in opposition to our judgment regarding our political and religious leaders, which is the source of all Jewish suffering. It is long past time that Jews acknowledge this embittered reality. The religious are not only part of the problem. Judaism is the embodiment of Jewish suffering. In this case, Yehudim have no one to blame other than themselves. No people have been offered as much. No people have suffered as much. No place has been more contested. Consistent with what is written in the Torah of Moshe, all of this suffering and misfortune has and will continue to come upon us. And yet, we neither request nor seek the presence of Yahweh our God. Consistent with what is written in the Torah of Moshe, the one who draws out. All of this suffering and misfortune has and will continue to come upon us. And yet we neither request nor seek the presence of Yahweh, our God. We cannot return because we have not changed. Lo shub. Without turning around, we cannot be restored. From our depravity and our corruptions. And that is because it affects our ability to be prudent and thus understand the breadth of your support and verifications of your reliability. Daniel 9:13. I am often frustrated by the antagonism, irrationality, and idiocy of even those that have been fortunate enough to learn what I've had to share over 25 years, 100,000 hours of study, 36 books, and tens of thousands of hours of audio programming, providing insights as to who Yahweh is, what he's offering, and what he expects in return, beyond anything that has preceded it. And I witness gross antagonism, duplicity, depravity, corruptions, delusions, ignorance, irrationality, wholesale depravity, and corruptions. What I witness is the inability to be prudent, a failure to understand. Even when the means to know Yahweh, to find his love and support, and verifications of his reliability like have never been presented in all of human history are laid out and freely offered. And it's a tough and bitter pill to know that you're offering people the opportunity to live forever in God's presence, to be part of the covenant family, to come to know our Messiah and King, to appreciate our God. And they spit in your face for it. And almost every day there's a new attack, often from insiders. And it's exasperating, I'll tell you. You turn to God and say, God, this mission you have assigned for me is impossible. People are just way too irascible. They're just way too malignant. They're too full of themselves, too easily misled, too quick to condemn the truth and rally on the side of deceit. God, I don't know what to tell you, but the job can't be done. I read statements like this, like we have read in these past 4 or 5, with Daniel assessing what the prophets have revealed and what he was experiencing in Babylon. And I realize that my frustration is a nanosecond of what Yahweh has endured. Maybe a few hundred people up to this point, maybe 1,000 today. That's generous. No one appreciated. All the rest are delusional, self-serving, maniacal, irritable, recalcitrant, irritating, deplorable. And God's had to endure this for 6,000 years. For me, only 24 up to this point, and really only half of that as a target of the abuse, because Yahweh had me disavow anonymity when he had so many titles that were attributable to the job we're doing together. And I realized that when Moshe, 3 days out of Choreb, gave up and told God to kill him, that the job couldn't be done, I understand why he said it. When Dode essentially turned into a pile of goo on the floor in the midst of the Absalom rebellion, I get it. I understand. When both Shamuel and Yeshaya, great prophets, said to God, "We have failed you. I'm sorry. I feel ashamed." I understand. People are impossible. It is a 1 in a million kind of thing. And many will actually attack from the inside, as they did with Moshe, as they did with Dode. And as I told Rich as I began this program, that realizing that the two greatest men who ever worked with, the most resolute, most courageous of men, both gave up because of the impossibility of these people, for exactly the reasons that Daniel is itemizing here from the prophets. And I realize I'm not of their character. I didn't ask for this job. They didn't ask for this job either. But the job that Yahweh has assigned is impossible. God tried it himself, speaking for himself. Didn't do any better. It's tough. So as I told Rich that, it's tough to get up the desire to help people who don't want any help, who would rather kick you when you're down, even trip you to get you down, and then kick you while you're down, while telling everybody how wonderful they are and how much you deserve to be kicked and punched, sucker punched. That after a while it does get really old. And then I remember that I'm serving Yahweh, and he's endured it 6,000 years. I'm just a man, worthless apart from Yahweh. He happens to be God. We're better off that he doesn't do this himself anymore, because if he had to endure this constant assault, poof, the whole human experience would be over. The earth would be destroyed. God would say, I'm not going to deal with this. There'd be no reason for him to. And so the only chance that we have to get this thousands amongst billions to listen and to change exactly what it says here, shub for shub, is for Israel to go through the most horrible experience that's being alluded to here in the history of humanity, such that there is no choice but Yahweh. Far worse than the Hezekiah moment. And that's what will cause the change. That and the fact that in the last 3.5 years, God's going to re-engage. He's going to be there supporting everything that is accomplished between Elia and Yada in the end with the two witnesses. But why should God have to endure this? And why should any man give up when the consequences are so severe, when they can do God a service and fend off the malcontents and continue to speak so that those who are genuinely interested in knowing Yahweh and learning from him, coming to understand him, accept what he is offering, are willing to endure and engage thereafter, have that opportunity. And so the best way to deal with having been kicked and slandered and smeared is to go right back at it. And that's what we're doing. You can choose to listen. You can choose to turn away. You can choose to respond, or you can reject what is being conveyed from the prophets to you. You can be religious, you can be political, or you can choose to be part of the covenant, following God's instructions. But you do need to know that in the 2,500 years since the last prophet spoke, no one knew Yahweh's name until now. No one knew the terms and conditions of the covenant until now. No one knew that the benefits of the covenant were fulfilled through the Moed Mikre until now. No one knew that Dowd was not only the Messiah and returning king, but he is the one who fulfilled Pesach, Matzah, and Bekurim until now. No one knew the date that he fulfilled the spring Mikre until now. No one knew the date that he was returning until now. No one could explain the sacrifice of the red heifer, which is the Adamah Parah, or knew who was Obed Edom, or the man from Edom who saves many. No one was aware that the Nakar had arrived. No one was aware that Dowd had a herald. No one understood the message of the greater and lesser luminaries. No one had any appreciation that there are three destinations for human souls and that we all choose our destiny. No one knew any of these things. And so, are you going to reject the voice bringing all of this to you? Or are you going to listen? Your choice, free will and all. Good night.